There we go. So we are talking about leading from anywhere, our book just finished. You can see that on Greg's version.
Yeah,
So
first time getting the audiobook on Spotify for this book club, I
yeah,
think.
getting that free with your subscription.
Yeah, and sorry, it's not available everywhere, Tabata.
Yeah. I spent 25 minutes trying to troubleshoot my Spotify until I realized, wait, it's not available here.
Hasn't been unlocked.
Yeah. Funny, Australia and UK. Not even in the US it's not unlocked yet. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
I guess it's a test bed.
Mm.
It's a bit unusual doing only audiobook. I feel a little bit lost not being able to refer to pages and highlight and stuff like that. But yeah, did we all read the book?
Yep.
Yes.
So who
And it's
does anyone
funny.
want to go first on this?
I can go first, but I also wanted to make the comment that I followed your advice from last time. I read it on the Kindle and I highlighted. I couldn't add notes. It was too much of a bother from my Kindle to do it. But I highlighted everything and it was really great. But then when I was done and I want to refer back to things, I really missed having the copy in my hand so I could like go through it. It's maybe it's a matter of habit. I don't know, but I really missed it. Reading it
Well,
wasn't a problem, but going back through it.
I'll tell you what I did briefly. I'll kick it back over to you, Tabata. But with the audiobook, I I listened to the whole thing and I was like, I have no idea how to go into the book club with this. So yesterday I just went back and listened to little snippets. So I got the chapter title, took some notes, and I went to the end of each chapter and listened to that sort of summary bit where he's talking about rules to live by and stuff like that. So I wrote all those down. So that's how I took my notes in order to kind of build a picture. Um, anyway, back over to you. Go ahead.
Maybe that's what I need to do next time. Take some handwritten notes. Yeah. Um, I really like the book. Thanks for choosing it. It had been on my to read list for a long time. I manage a remote team, so to me it was really useful. I have to say, I thought it was a bit high level and short. I wish that some chapters had gone a little bit more into detail. And I also realized that this was more geared towards people who worked at an office and then went remote because it was written during the pandemic. And so there were a lot of things that were assumed that it didn't really apply to me. And I actually never managed an in-person team. Even before the pandemic, I was already working remote and managing remote teams. So kind of hard to relate. But I really liked him. As a matter of fact, I went to one of his webinars after reading the book, and I like how he communicates, how he says what he has to say. Um, so as far as the book goes, I made some notes. Going remote again, that was part of the thing where I've been remote from day one, so it was hard to really connect with that. But I really like this idea of superordinate goals, and that was right in chapter one, and I guess page 19. And I really like this concept of having this goal that everyone on the team is like buys into. And normally, I think you would go with the organizational goal or the wider organization objective, vision, mission, whatever you might call it. But I think I took it even one, I interpreted it to a different level, which was also to have a goal for the team itself, in this case, as a remote team, and how beneficial that might be because, especially being remote, we're so distant from the rest of the organization. We're so disconnected, I feel at times, from the rest of the organization, that goal, that overall statement from the organization might just feel as remote as Siberia. So taking that back into the team, having that goal that everyone can resonate with, I thought was a really, really good tip from this chapter. Um, I love the fact that he added this bullet list at the end of each chapter, rules for remote leaders, that summarized it. I really like that. I think every book should have that. Yeah, I also, in chapter 2, building culture remotely, I added some highlights, things like team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect, in which people are comfortable being themselves. And I thought a lot about this, how much it affects remote teams, you know, how to be comfortable being yourself when you're on a screen, or how much do you really bring yourself, how much do you show up, you know, 50%, 70% of your true self in remote settings, when you can just be coding, when you can just be doing whatever you're doing in at the same time, when most people have their cameras off and hardly show up. And how he compares a little bit of that psychological safety between being in person versus remote, and how, yeah, how to build it, right? I like the idea of the trust, respect, and the different aspects of psychological safety that are not commonly talked about as well. And that he touched it, but like I said, I thought it was a bit too high level, especially if you're going from an in-office environment to remote and you don't have that kind of experience. I thought it was really high level, and wish that he had gone a little bit deeper here. Let's see, another section that I really enjoyed was hiring remote teammates, because as I wrote in the chat, I've been recruiting heavily for the last half year, and recruiting remotely, especially in different time zones, different cultures, different backgrounds, is really challenging. And I took some of these, chapter 3 was really, really great. I took some of these things and used them the same day that I read them, or the next day. You know, I learned quite a lot here about even the way I approach the interviewing process, how I normally have 3 different interviews and I focus on 3 different things. And after reading this chapter, I kind of turn them around a little bit. I started with that, what does your ideal team look like? More about behavior and personality and so on, instead of going technical first, you know, because those kinds of skills you can learn at any time, right? But the how do you collaborate, how do you communicate, those things are actually more difficult to learn on the job. So I learned, I really love this chapter. I learned a lot, especially again, onboarding as well, what to prioritize. Of course, this we know, but being reminded, I think, was really great as I was going through this process. Let's see. Sorry, just looking at my notes. Communicating virtually, I have to say, I was really surprised when I read about the study that says on one-to-one meetings, it's better to have the camera off. At first, I'm like, I'm reading this wrong. And I went back and I read over and over again. And I was really surprised, because I have a hard time connecting with people when I'm looking at a blank screen, when I'm talking to them and personally. And so I tried that the day after. You know, I made an excuse and I turned my camera off, and then the other person turned their camera off. And I thought we lost something, actually. And the studies show that you pick up more on their emotional reactions. I guess it's because if I know that you see me, then I'm maybe don't make the faces that I would normally make if you can't see me when I'm reacting emotionally to something or something like that. And maybe you can hear that better in the voice, less constraint from the speaker maybe. But I really felt like I lost something. So that one I couldn't apply to myself. But I was really shocked when I read that one. And hey, Noah. I think, let's see. Sorry, my Kindle is. The whole bit about virtual meetings, I also felt like I really enjoyed the idea of breaking it up when it came to the problem and the solution meetings. That's something I also took away and thought I will implement that right away as well and see how it works. Because I normally have a 90-minute session where we spend 30 minutes talking about the problem, we take a break, and then we spend another 30 minutes talking about possible ideas or possible solutions and ideas. We take a break and we come back and we kind of have to pick something, right, to go with, make a decision. And I really liked what he suggested here was take a smaller chunks and talk about the problem, focus on the problem, and then let people go. Let people go away and go do something else and think about something else and come back, right? The next day, maybe even, and then talk about ideas and solutions and go with something. And the more I thought about that, the more it makes sense, because sometimes it does take time for us to to really dissect the problem, to really be able to come up with good ideas, right? Sometimes it is the next day. So I really like that bit. Took it away. We'll try it next week, hopefully with a good result. Yeah, those are my favorite bits. Those are the notes that I took. Focusing on the outcome, not activity, when it came to managing performance. That's something that I think we all already do. So it was good to reread, good to get some different overview on this, but of course, things that I am already used to. And again, and then the book was over. It was really short, I thought. So that's my review.
Cool. Thank you, Tabata. I was going to respond to that thing about breaking meetings up. The problem meeting, and then have an idea meeting, and then a decision meeting. I'm not sure what that. I guess it helps people to reflect on things and bring good ideas, maybe to the second meeting. But I feel like different people require different approaches, right? Like some people maybe need to pack it all into one session and really crack the issue. So I don't know if I agree with it. And plus, you might have situations where it's really hard to schedule meetings, and then like the second meeting wouldn't include the same people as the first meeting due to clashes and stuff like that. So I don't know what I think about that. I think if you can make it work, then yes, it would work well.
I don't like the idea of 3 meetings. I think that's a bit too much, to be honest. But I like the idea of 2. I like the idea of focusing on the problem, because I think, at least from my experience, a lot of people jump into meetings already thinking about solutions. And if we just say, nope, stop, we're going to focus on problems and only talk about that, then I think it can just help people focus on understanding what it is that they're so desperately trying to solve, right? So I like the idea of 2, definitely not 3. But like I said, I haven't tried it. I can give you some feedback after next week.
Actually, thinking about it, I have done that. Actually, Noel and I have done that with a client where we talked about problem, pain points and stuff like that. And then we said, what is the how might we question for that, right? And then we built this huge backlog of how might we fill in the blank. And we didn't answer that question, right? We just present the challenges and the problems. And then we have this big pick list of problems that we can, prioritize and address in the future sessions. So yeah, that's a really good idea, Tabata. Is maybe the 2 meeting idea rather than 3. It's cool. So yeah, I can talk. I think I agree that it was short. I don't have the physical book, so it's hard for me to see it, but the fact that I managed to finish it in time for the book club means that
it's either very good or very short.
One thing I really liked seeing is the companion website of resources. And I've got it open, but I haven't really looked through it, but I think it can be quite handy to go and look at those to address certain things. I think it kind of covers a lot of different things. So it's covering all of the typical stuff with virtual, connecting virtually and remotely. I found it very interesting that it handled hiring and saying goodbye. So I think you don't see a lot of stuff around that in this context, right? So like if you're remote and you've got to make it meaningful and impactful, here are some things you can do, to say goodbye in a nice, in a respectful way. That was really cool. The there's like a few tips and tricks, like setting your business hours and adhering to those. This is the keeping engaged, chapter 9. Chapter 9. Set people boundaries, have a work ritual. So it's a few tips for making that work-life balance a little better. And I would be remiss. Well, one gripe I had was in the appendix. He talked about the technology that you need to use, right? So he talked about Asana, Basecamp, Trello, Dropbox, Google Drive, and then he basically got to the online collaboration tools and whiteboarding tools. And he said examples are Lucidchart and Bluescape. And I was like, what? Why isn't he mentioning Miro and Mural? Is that just not a thing? Is there a lack of that stuff in North America or something? I was really confused by that.
I also picked up on that one. I also thought it was really strange.
Is he sponsored by some of those products or something? Like he's not mentioning the big players, which I found very strange. Anyway, I would be remiss if I didn't mention in the chapter 11, he featured this company, I guess, or I think it's a nonprofit called Tulsa Remote. I don't know if you read that bit, but it's my hometown. So I thought it was really exciting to hear that mentioned. And if you go and you look at it, it's actually a really cool idea. And I think I heard a podcast about it as well, but it's instead of the government funding companies to get people to move somewhere to work for them, it's like flipped on its head. So you have like a nonprofit organization funding people to come build a community, and they can work anywhere else. Like, so they're all working remotely and they're all congregating in this area, and it actually builds a cohort with a ready-made Slack and like almost like a TripAdvisor style kind of guidebook to the town, and then it comes ready-made with a new set of friends, essentially. Right? We all have this in common, and we can meet our own meetups and stuff, which I've already heard about it outside of this book. So I thought it was very cool they mentioned that, and it's my hometown. It's kind of nice to see that happening in the town where I grew up. So that puts this book in a little special place in my heart. I think I've covered. There's the chapter 5, which I think I can maybe take into my day-to-day, which is asynchronous is the rule, synchronous is the exception. I found that a bit novel. Essentially, using Slack is the rule, and then having a meeting is the exception to the rule. Write concisely. I felt like I could take a lesson there, and then infuse positivity in your writing to kind of compensate for the fact that you're not speaking as much and you're not seeing people as much. So make sure that your writing is filled with positivity, so that there's no confusion about the tone. I think emojis help with that too, right?
Absolutely. And I think I was so happy. I have a sticky, oh, you can see it. It says positive intent on my monitor to remind me at all times.
Yeah, positive intent. And it's hard sometimes to assume positive intent with the clinical, kind of messaging that we all have. That's a bit it for me, I think. I've made lots of notes, but those were some of the highlights. A lot of it just seemed really practical, and a lot of it did validate things that I've already been doing. So it's nice to get that validation, but that, I guess the flip side of that, it means I didn't gain a whole lot of insights that I might have. I think I already had the insights. But yeah, that's it for me. No, did you read the book? No, okay.
I want to make a quick comment about that communication virtually that you said about the asynchronous communication. And we started out like that with the current team that I'm in now, but we come from such different cultural backgrounds. We speak so many different languages. We're in so many different countries that I found it really challenging to have asynchronous communication, because somebody was always being rude or not answering in a timely manner, or misunderstanding the intent. So I thought it actually improved when we started to have meetings with topics, with agendas, and everybody had to show up and discuss that specific thing then and there. And then when you could see people's expressions and, I don't know, body language, it made a big difference. So as much as I would love for this to work, I don't think it works with every team in every scenario either.
But when I read that, I was thinking, when you assume that asynchronous is the default, but really what you're looking to do is create processes and systems that allow you to move the work asynchronously. So you have quite polished, if you're working on code, we haven't agreed that we'll check in, we'll put it here. If you want to find, the test files for this will be here. If there's meeting notes, this is the way that we'll put it. So you design a system and a process that allows you to go asynchronous, to allow for time zones. But I think that's how I imagined it in my head. And I thought, okay, let's maybe put more time and care into things that if we were working together in the same office, we wouldn't necessarily have to be that polished at that kind of thing. But if we're doing that, then maybe we need to be better at handing work cleanly off with, where we can do.
Oh yeah, I just realized that in the appendix where he talks about the technology, when he says asynchronous, he's talking about email and like maybe ditch the email and use the tools like, I guess, Trello or something, Asana.
Yeah.
And then when he says synchronous tools, he's talking about telephone, Slack, and MS Teams. So I'm a little bit confused by that because I think of Slack as asynchronous, but
yeah. So I can go next. So I think you've special guest visitor. Mm-hmm. I think, I agree with pretty much all the things you've said there. It's interesting. I like, Greg, the way you described that Tulsa, because actually I think in a couple of words you explained it to me better than I thought. When I was understanding the book, I didn't really have a very good grasp, but I think I've got a better grasp of it from the extra you added into there to what that was about. And also, Tabitha, what you were saying, I also found that at first I was reading a few things, I thought this will be interesting, and then I realized it didn't really go much further. I felt like I was being tantalized by a subject, but then it didn't really, some of the areas it did, but some of the other areas it just quickly skimmed over. So one of the things here that I've got noted is he's saying it's really important to get equal access to technologies. And I think that's something that I found when you're using third parties and, they're working somewhere else and they've got substandard, maybe some developers have got two, 30-inch monitors and somebody else is working off a laptop, and, somebody's got, great headset and somebody else is speaking into the little hole on the top of the frame of them. And that really means, again, sort of subconsciously, those people slip into second-class citizens in the team, I think. People don't really want to think that, but I think at a lower level, that's kind of what's happening. So I've been trying to say, hey, look, if one team member's got a nice webcam that costs £40, somebody else is using the laptop, let's change it up so everyone's got the same. I like this part here saying that shared identity is really important for any team, but especially for remote ones. And this is, I like the emphasis where they say, okay, you've got ordinary teams and then remote teams are shared, because this is a real challenge. How do you build a shared identity for a remote team? Some of these people are potentially never going to meet. So if you're using, a third-party company in India, the chances are they're not going to be flying them over, even for the annual event. Potentially, they could just be, part of your team. And so that's something they give a couple of tips on. But maybe that's not maybe an area that I'd be interested to hear more on. I like the question that he tests teams on, where he says, "What are we fighting for?" And this is why we're here. What's the reason for us? And if we can ask that question of the people in the team and they have the same answer, I think that's a pretty good metric. if you ask that question to the team, people have different answers, then it's a problem. And then if you ask the team and they have no idea, then I think you're at the other end of the spectrum, where they say, look, I'm just doing stories, we look at the velocity, we're doing stuff. I don't, why, that's somebody else's problem. The superordinate goals, having this shared goal is interesting, because I was thinking about this. I wish they'd given it again. This would be a good area to give some examples, but I was imagining it would be something beyond what the product owner was putting forward. So the product owner's got a vision for what you're doing as a goal, but we might have as a subordinate goal that we are going to become experts in TDD, or we are, something we care about. We're going to make our transition to the cloud and make sure that we have a broad cross skill. We don't just have one superstar who's our Azure person, that we're going to make everyone. And then we're going to measure that, what's our measurable progress against that, which is something they talk about later in terms of making that a motivating factor. So that's a good idea, I think. He talks about the dependency and the structure. So I think, I don't know, most teams probably are clear about the structure and dependency, but if they're not, they certainly should be. Dependability, I think, how much we can rely on each other. So we're not thinking I'm just the tester on the team or I'm the developer. We're thinking about the end goal. So I think changing teams to own success and failure of releases or sprints or whatever it is, that's a good point. I also like the expansion that you mentioned there, Tabitha, on the psychological safety, where they were talking about trust. And I think he says here something that was interesting, saying that trust is reciprocated. So we need to give trust to be able to receive it. So we need to, I think, as the leadership role, we need to start small by giving people the opportunity to show trust and then reacting correctly, if things go well or badly, I suppose, and then turning the dial as that goes in the right direction. And respect is a learned behavior. So it needs to be modeled at, every opportunity consistently. And that if you fall back on that, at some point, then, you can put this whole thing in reverse, I guess. So I think, like our feedback book, one of the points he gives here is they ask feedback from a trusted colleague. So because of our, behavioral blindness, we quirk of human nature is that we're blind to most of our offensive slights, that, we could be saying something that might be read by somebody else in a different way. And it's better to have somebody else to pick those things up rather than rely solely on yourself. I was wondering, I really like the trial idea for hiring people. And I was quite certain, and then I was thinking about it a bit more, and I'm just kind of wondering, on the other side of the coin, if I was going to take a job and they said, yeah, well, you have the role, we put you on a trial for a month. And I'm just wondering how that would feel. Somebody, you can do that in parallel to your own job, but if you gave it up and you accepted that, and then they said, okay, the trial hasn't been successful, there's a certain degree of jeopardy in there. I don't know if necessarily it's a deal breaker, but I haven't got enough experience of doing trials with people on hire, but I really like the key points that were drawn out there, saying working out what your candidate's communication style is key. So delving into that in terms of the questions, asking them questions of how they motivate themselves when working remote, what's their organization process for when they've been working remote as well. And I think you're right there where you said, it's asking people about algorithms or technique, all this stuff could be taught in an afternoon. But if somebody's communication style is not compatible with your team, you probably, that's a big item that you're probably not going to fix. You need a close fit for that for success. I also I'm kind of scratching my head about the voice only communication. I haven't tested it, but the thing I did think was I've heard people say, when you've got a video and a voice and you put this together, if you have poor quality video but good quality voice, that works. Whereas they say it's more detrimental if you had great quality video and poor quality voice. But that isn't necessarily a dimension that he goes into. So he talks about one particular study. I guess maybe I'm slightly skeptical. There is one study, it could be very small cohort of people that were involved in that. So potentially, you have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, it seems like
Uh,
a quirky take on it or something. Like you're supposed to go back to the age of people talking on the phone, and
yeah,
I don't know.
I'm willing to, park that in the back and think about that. And see, it's a nice thing to consider.
Oh, I
Because
wanted
the
to
others,
respond to the thing about the trial.
yeah,
I think I got that he's from North America, and there was one bit about given 2 weeks notice, and like so the culture over in North America is much, I think, is much more rapid. So maybe a 1 month trial is considered a long time, and then winding that down with short notice isn't a big problem over there because nobody gets more than 2 weeks notice in the States, right? So if you did it over here, I guess we do kind of do it here, right? We have the 3 month probation and things like that, or 6 month probation. So we might have a version of that here, but it's all much more. I think there's some legal considerations in Britain as well.
But I think the idea in the book was that he said most people would keep their day job as well. And I was just like, how do you do that? You definitely don't have a family or hobbies or friends.
Yeah, you're a workaholic American, right?
Yeah. Pretty much.
If it was a short trial, you could maybe take 2 weeks holiday and do the trial and do it that way. But if it's longer, it'd be difficult. So I'm not. It's a good. I think it's a good idea. It's just there could be some problems in reality of it, I think.
Impractical. Good idea, but not at all practical in real life, I think. But yeah, that was an interesting bit as well.
It might work with contractors, maybe. Maybe contractors will be willing to take that on. I think that could be we'll shorten the interview process, but we have a quick. I mean, effectively, you're like that anyway. So then he's got there was the study here in COVID where people preferred seeing the real room in the background rather than the fake Hawaiian sunset, he said. And that's interesting. I mean, I want, this is the kind of information I want people to find out and tell me, is one thing better than another? And then then we can move ahead without sort of, thinking about that. So maybe that's true, He then says, check yourself before going on camera, put a light behind your camera and know how to make eye contact. I mean, that's tantalizing. What else do you mean there? I think that's a deeper subject. There's a lot of other people go into what's different about presenting on camera to maybe making a presentation in a room. And there's a lot of subtleties in there that I think that's an area that could have been interesting that wasn't explored much further.
So I watched the webinar when I said, and it was exactly on this point because he said you should look at the camera and talk to the camera as if you were talking to a person. I have a real hard time doing that because I want to look at you when I'm talking to you, and you're on my screen, you're not on my camera, So I also tried that because during the webinar he's looking at the camera the whole time, and it really felt like he was talking to me more than if he's like. I could get that feeling when he was doing it, but it's really tough for me to do it during meetings. So I see the benefits, but it's a one-sided benefit, I think.
Yeah. And I also saw someone who had there's a guy who does a series about on camera presentations who really goes into this stuff. And he actually was talking about you want to have 80% eye contact. 100% eye contact is unsettling. So if you're staring the whole time at the camera and I think there's now software where they can move your eyeballs so it's always looking at the camera, isn't it? Someone has done that, and it basically looks very strange.
Creepy,
whereas when you're in a conversation, you sometimes think about things and you'd look away and then you come back, and so it's nuanced. But he doesn't cover that. He doesn't go into that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think well, I don't know if it was mentioned in the book, but I think in the COVID era, post-pandemic era, you've got a lot of people are kind of very, they're uncomfortable with the camera on. They're uncomfortable for maybe class reasons and cultural reasons, right? Like if they do show the background, they're maybe ashamed of the mess, or they're they don't want people to know what their home looks like. And then there's just the anxiety of being on camera and being presentable. Even though people who go to the office are presentable, but I think there's some kind of anxiety around the camera being on them and just technology being pointed at them and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot to that topic, which maybe wasn't, the book was quite high level.
Covered. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's almost a mini book in its own right, isn't it? A thing. I'm sure there's things you can do to make that better, looking at the kind of information that people seem to have on that. So he's saying, people should have agendas for meetings. We never have an agenda for this meeting. Well, we have an informal one, but do we stick to the plan? Actually, that was another thing he said. Start 5 minutes early and keep the call open. And I'm not sure about this, because I almost think in Teams, if there's a meeting and somebody joins the meeting before it starts, it feels slightly passive aggressive in a way. I don't know if that's, it's like, Jesus, look at Super Steve there. He's always in there, 3 minutes before everyone else, when everyone is waiting for their little machine to go ping.
Yeah, I think what you need to do in your team, what do you call it? The working agreements is to say, for the meetings I'm running, I'm going to try to turn up early and stay late, because I want there to be an opportunity to socialize a bit, hang out, talk about stuff. So I think if that's the explicitly stated purpose, I think that's quite helpful. And it's a cool idea. I think it's a cool idea to say, I'll be around early if anybody wants to, chat with me about anything, and I'll hang around afterwards as well. If you're able to do that, that's great.
Well, that's one of my big highlights here. Was something that I'm really a fan of now, is making unstructured time during the meeting or elsewhere to discuss topics. So, we start with a meeting with like a fun question topic, and we just kick that around till everyone's done it, and then we move on. And after a while, it becomes part of a ritual, and everyone's comfortable with it. By the time we've done that, it feels like something's happened. The atmosphere in the meeting's changed a little bit. We've heard everyone's voice. We know it all works, and so I'm a huge fan of that now. That's what I'm doing as much as I can with Teams.
Yeah, I have a thing I like to try to do, and not always do, but it's like essentially an icebreaker or a warm up, but it can serve almost like three different it can serve three different purposes. So one is to get people engaged, which is like, that's the icebreaker, right? To get people talking or get their head in the game. Another one is to kind of get to know each other a little bit better, so you're building the team cohesion. And then if you can, make it somehow related to what the session's about, right? So it's like you can build in something around like, what are you gonna, how are you showing up today? How do you feel about this workshop, or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So I like having a multi-purpose icebreaker if possible, right?
I think it makes for an informal barometer of the trust level within the team. If you say, what's what makes you sad, and if you say, look, if my Tesco's delivery comes and I open up the custard creams and they've all been smashed, that's a disaster. And then if somebody else, a couple of months later says, well, actually, about this time of year is when my father died, and that's always really sad, and you think, wow, someone said something really personal, and it feels like, you suddenly think this team is, deepening in their confidences with each other. This is a sign of maturity. And it models for everyone else to sort of say, hey, we're not interested in the custard creams anymore. Tell us a bit more about you. So we were talking about the thinking creatively, and I hadn't really thought so much about the fact that you were saying it was 3 meetings. I was thinking it very much, this looks very much like an on-site retro, the kind of thing that you used to do, where we say, okay, let's talk about what has gone wrong. And I think of it more as a kind of a mindset, breaking into 3 parts. So the first part is, okay, let's define, before we leap into solutions, let's talk about what the issue is, the problem, what the impacts were, what people saw in the information, put that on the table. And then after that, the idea of having breakout rooms says, look, there's a lot of issues here. Choose something you want to work on with, if somebody else wants to join you, go away, work on your idea so you've got different people in a different context. And I think that's, he says, if it's a meeting bigger than 6 people, you know, you need to think about breaking this down. So that works well. And then coming back and saying, okay, you've got an idea of what you might want to try, especially in a retro context. But what you have to try and do is maybe somebody else has worked on the same problem. You've got 2 different things. Maybe you need to put them together. And then ultimately you need to sell it back to the team. Said, right, we've decided the solution is we all need to get up half an hour earlier and start our stand-up, you know, at 8:30 instead of 9. But you have to get everyone to buy into that. And I think that's the decision meeting, you know, but that could all happen in the space of one meeting. But it's more about, you know, facilitating it that way. But with
treat them as agenda points of a bigger meeting.
Yeah, maybe even more than agenda points, sort of thinking, you know, thinking hats, you know, where you're saying, look at it in this vein to start with, and then choose whether or not you want to work on a solution. And then ultimately, you know, we move into a phase of saying, now we're doing, you know, are we happy with this or not?
I mean, he didn't, I guess we're coming up to the end of our session, but he didn't call it out explicitly, but he talked about, you know, like if you're brainstorming and you've come up with loads of ideas, you can use a ranked choice voting approach to, you know, it's essentially dot voting and or something like that. But it's I am a fan of that kind of divergent thinking and then convergent thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like give me all your ideas, let's get them all out there, and then allow everyone to kind of digest all of that, and then zero in on what the best ideas are. Because I think he says you could spend some time talking about each of these things, but it turns out nobody cares about any of these except for maybe 3 of them, you know. So you want to converge, you know, and using the ranked choice voting, which I have done that before. It's like, you know, write down your top choices, and then, you know, you kind of compare notes across a big group.
And backfire. I once did that, and they all chose their own sticky.
Well, there's an easy solution to that, which is that you're not allowed to choose your own.
Yeah.
That's like the Eurovision rule, right?
Yeah.
You can't vote for your own country. So then I like I mean, the managing performance, yeah, sure, surveillance is not a good idea. That's not new. But the idea of saying, okay, well, leadership now means if you're not surveilling people, and that never really worked anyway, then you need to think about providing extra feedback and coaching. So your role is changing, and you need to, on the Venn diagram of what you're doing as a leader, the pie that says feedback needs to get bigger, and the pie that was coaching needs to get bigger as well. And you need to think about helping people tracking progress. And so, you know, that's easy sometimes with agile software development teams, but maybe with those intangible goals that you're setting the team, saying, okay, how are we getting better at, you know, something that's not on the backlog, measuring those and making those out there. That's interesting. And, you know, when you're having discussions with somebody one-to-one and they're defining their goal, I think it's a good idea maybe then to share those goals and then make them, you know, publish them so that other people can A, help you be accountable, and B, support you in the goals that you've set for yourself so that, you know, you can hopefully be successful in them. I thought that there was a little bit on feedback, and it was interesting because now we read the feedback book. I thought the feedback book had a lot more ideas in terms of types of feedback, when to do those feedback. So I feel, you know, better armed in that conversation. But the idea that they called out, this is a positive thing that leaders need to transition to. So that was good.
I'm going to grab the visual aid for the video, people watching the video. I'll be right back.
And I like so Greg was mentioning the business hours. And I think this is something that the teams I've got at the moment, I think this is something that we don't do as well as we could, because like you, Tabitha, we've got people in, you know, maybe 3 or 4 countries, and then also there's nuance on top of that. So somebody's work hours might be different, but maybe a person has an individual preference for something. So I think it would be good to have a table. Yeah.
Previously on Breakfast Books.
Thanks for the feedback. So I think that's a good idea. And the also there was discussion the other day about how do you separate that. The whole thing about burnout is, I think there was a point, I think it called it an American joke that if you're working from home, you're not working from home or something. And the reality, I think, as most people know, is that you kind of self-guilt yourself into probably more work and longer hours somehow. It's a trap, I think, that pretty much everyone falls into who does this for any length of time.
He said
So
it very
having,
nicely, that if you feel like the company is doing something for you and you owe them, right? So then you
yeah,
give even more of yourself. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
And
I
you
think
save
it
time
says
on
that,
the
doesn't
commute,
it?
right?
Yeah.
So
So but there's some techniques, here to say, knowing the schedule of everyone else, that you don't necessarily call someone, when their official time stops. You say there's a hard stop for someone in India at, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever it might be. So you'd never call them after that unless it was exceptional, maybe. But that's only known if you define that front. And then develop an after work ritual, which is something, I mean, in my Alexa, because I always forget to do the timesheet, Alexa reminds me at the end of the day at 5 o'clock to do the timesheet. And the funny thing is, because she reminds me to do the timesheet when I do it, as soon as I do it, it feels like there's a transition, right? That's it. It's a clap of the hands and I'm done for the day, which I don't usually get that kind of closure during the rest of the week. When that time comes around, I still think, okay, there's maybe one or two things more that could get done before tomorrow. So yeah, that's those were the notes I had.
Cool. Well, I think we need to wrap up. Overall, what do you think? Recommended?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's
I would say so.
there isn't a huge amount of books like this, so it's good. I think there's areas it could be deeper and better, but I can't think of something else that would trump it at the moment.
I bought a really small one quite a while back. I think it's called Managing Remote Teams or something. Can't remember. I'd have to go in the other room to look for it. But yeah, there's a few other things out there, but I think there's something around like the new normal, which is this sort of hybrid situation, right? There's a lot to deal with when you have a hybrid setup. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great tips in there. It's really well structured. There's a few chapters that address things that you haven't seen anywhere else. So, so especially around some of the hiring practices and yeah, it's definitely relevant in the modern age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think it really encompasses a lot of different topics that, even though he doesn't go deep into them, it could at least like propel you into looking deeper into something specifically that maybe you wouldn't do otherwise, like the hiring. I mean, I was following my process that I've always had, but he really inspired me to look even a little bit further than that, so a little bit deeper into the topic. So I think I would recommend the book. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if David Burkus truly lives by these things or if it's aspirational, because I feel like American culture is often not open to these ideas,
I thought the same thing, actually.
work-life balance and the whole trusting your staff, building trust and not surveilling them. So yeah, I wonder if it's kind of like, I wish this is the ideal. This is the ideal. This is not how people actually behave.
Yeah, but I have to say, I've been in Sweden now for 13 years, and before that, I lived in Florida, and I worked for corporations in the US, and I would never guess that this kind of culture would be adopted. But now I've taken 2 different workshops. Last week I took, or the week before, Management 3.0 foundational workshop, and there were two people from the US, and they worked for really agile companies or organizations, and they were really self-organized, and they had all this freedom. And I'm like, are you sure? I've heard of this company before. That's not how they were 13, 14 years ago. But there's been a real, I would say, real progress in the US.
Yeah, and you hear in the news, well, I mean, just wrapping up, but yeah, you hear in the news, like post-pandemic, like so many people have just decided like life is more important. Like work needs to revolve around life, not the other way around. I think a lot of people have come to that realization in the last 2-3 years. So yeah, maybe it's turning around. Okay.
I'm going to stop the record.